London, 1888. The gas lamps flicker against cobblestone streets, fog curls in alleyways, and the night carries the sound of footsteps that vanish into silence. But beneath the surface of this thriving metropolis lies something sinister, an evil that will soon grip the entire city in terror. His name, no one truly knows, but history remembers him by a chilling moniker: Jack the Ripper. Imagine this. You're walking home from a long day's work in Whitechapel, the working-class district of London. The streets are narrow, the air thick with coal smoke, and people huddle in shadows to escape the bitter cold. Suddenly word spreads. Another body has been found. Another woman, her life taken in the dead of night, her remains bearing the marks of something far more monstrous than robbery or revenge. This isn't random violence. This is the work of a predator. The police are baffled, the newspapers are electrified, and the public? They're terrified. Because for the first time, murder feels unstoppable, like a dark shadow creeping over every household. Jack the Ripper is more than a killer. He's the ghost in London's alleyways, the nightmare in the public's imagination, and the figure who turned Whitechapel into a hunting ground. But who were his victims? What kind of man could commit such atrocities? And why, even after all these years, do we still not know the truth? To understand the legend, we must first step into Whitechapel itself, the heart of East London, where the Industrial Revolution had left thousands poor, desperate, and vulnerable. Streets overflowed with immigrants, factory workers, and women forced into sex work just to survive. Poverty was crushing, alcoholism rampant, and hope scarce. It was in this fragile world that Jack the Ripper struck, and he knew exactly where to find those least protected. Between August and November of 1888, 5 murders, brutal, calculated, and horrifying, would ignite the most infamous manhunt in British history. These women, remembered as the Canonical Five, were not just names in police reports. They were human beings whose stories deserved to be told, and their tragic deaths raised haunting questions that investigators still can't answer. Why them? Why so brutal? And most haunting of all, why was the killer never caught? As we peel back the layers of this mystery, you'll discover the chilling details of each murder, the suspects who shocked the world, and the legacy Jack left behind that continues to fascinate and horrify. This isn't just a story about crime. It's about fear, power, and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. On the morning of August the 31st, 1888, a chilling discovery set the stage for London's darkest mystery. In the dim light of dawn, a cart driver stumbled upon a woman's body lying in Buck's Row, a quiet street in Whitechapel. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols, though most knew her simply as Polly. Polly was 43 years old, a mother, and like many in Whitechapel, she lived a life weighed down by poverty, separated from her husband. She drifted from workhouse to workhouse, surviving day by day. On that final night, she had been turned away from lodging because she didn't have the few pennies needed for a bed. "I'll soon get my DOS money," she reportedly said, before stepping into the shadows of East London. Hours later, she was dead. Her body told a story so gruesome that even hardened policemen were shaken. Her throat had been slashed, and her abdomen mutilated with chilling precision. This wasn't the chaotic rage of a drunken brawl. It was deliberate, surgical, and terrifying. Whoever had done this knew exactly what he was doing, and it was only the beginning. The murder of Polly Nichols sent shockwaves through Whitechapel. At first, many believed it was just another tragic killing in a district plagued by crime. But soon the details made it clear this was different. This was ritualistic, calculated, and filled with a kind of cold savagery no ordinary criminal displayed. Less than a week later, another woman, Annie Chapman, would meet the same horrific fate. Found in a backyard on Hanbury Street, Annie's body bore even more disturbing injuries. The killer had not only murdered her, but also removed organs from her body, suggesting Not just bloodlust, but knowledge of anatomy. Was Jack the Ripper a butcher, a surgeon, or someone who simply studied enough to play the part? The police, under tremendous pressure, began a desperate search. Detectives scoured taverns, questioned locals, and chased rumors. But the killer was always one step ahead. And the press? They sensationalized every detail. Newspapers printed gruesome sketches, fueling the terror and giving the killer an audience he might have secretly craved. Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman were not isolated tragedies. They were warnings. The Ripper had found his hunting ground, and he was just getting started. As September gave way to October, London would realize that the nightmare had no intention of ending. And when the Ripper struck again, he would make sure the entire world took notice. The question is, how far would his brutality go? Kaboom! By late September 1888, fear had sunk its claws deep into Whitechapel. Women refused to walk the streets alone. Men kept watch outside lodging houses. And the police? They patrolled endlessly, yet could never seem to stop what was coming next. Jack the Ripper had tasted blood, and now his violence was escalating. On the night of September 30th, London witnessed what became known as the double event. 2 murders, committed within the span of just 1 hour, left the city stunned and the authorities utterly humiliated. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride, discovered in Dutfield's yard. She was 45 years old, a woman who had endured hardship. Like so many in Whitechapel, unlike the earlier victims, Elizabeth's body showed only a single slash to the throat, and none of the abdominal mutilations that had horrified investigators before. Some theorized the Ripper was interrupted mid-act, perhaps startled by footsteps, or the arrival of a witness. But there's no doubt this was his work. Barely an hour later, just blocks away, Catherine Eddowes was found in Mitre Square. What had been left undone with Elizabeth was unleashed upon Catherine with terrifying ferocity. Her throat was cut, her face mutilated, and her body savaged in ways too disturbing for newspapers to fully print. More chilling still, her kidney had been removed, taken by the killer as if it were some grotesque trophy. The double event proved beyond question that Jack the Ripper was not just a murderer. He was a hunter who thrived on chaos. He wanted attention, he wanted terror, and he had both in abundance. Soon after Catherine's murder, police discovered a clue scrawled on a wall nearby. Chalk writing that read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it the Ripper's message, or a cruel coincidence? Fearing anti-Semitic riots, the authorities ordered it erased before it could even be photographed. To this day, it remains one of the most hotly debated pieces of the case. By now, the entire world was watching. Newspapers as far as America and Europe printed the gruesome updates. Letters began arriving at police stations, some mocking, some threatening. Most were hoaxes, but one would soon become infamous, signed with 2 words that sealed the killer's place in history: Jack the Ripper. The killer was no longer a phantom lurking in London's fog. He was now a legend, taunting the police, feeding off the hysteria, and promising more blood. But no one could imagine what he was planning for October. By November 1888, London was trapped in a waking nightmare. Fear no longer whispered through alleyways. It screamed from the headlines, from the terrified faces of Whitechapel's women, and from the exhausted detectives chasing shadows. But nothing, not even the double event, could prepare the city for what was about to happen next. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly. Unlike the other victims, she was much younger, just 25 years old, and lived not on the streets, but in a small rented room on Miller's Court. Mary was beautiful, vibrant, and well-liked, but her life, too, was steeped in hardship. She worked the same dangerous trade as the Ripper's other victims, and that fatal choice placed her squarely in his sights. On the morning of November 9th, 1888, Mary's landlord sent an assistant to collect overdue rent. What he saw when he peered through her window would scar him forever. The room was silent. The bed was soaked in blood, and Mary Jane Kelly was almost unrecognizable. This was not just murder. It was annihilation. The Ripper had taken his time with her, shielded by the privacy of four walls instead of the open streets. He mutilated her body beyond anything seen before, leaving behind a crime scene so grotesque that seasoned officers recoiled in horror. Forensic reports later described her remains in chilling detail, but suffice it to say, this was the Ripper's masterpiece of destruction. For London, Mary's death was the breaking point. Panic turned to outrage. How could a killer carry out such horrors again and again? Right under the noses of Scotland Yard, detectives were accused of incompetence. Newspapers fanned public fury, and vigilante groups roamed the streets, convinced they could succeed where the police had failed. But then, suddenly, Jack the Ripper vanished. After Mary Jane Kelly, no confirmed murders ever bore his signature again. Had he been arrested for another crime? Had he fled the country? Or had he simply decided his reign of terror was complete? The silence was almost as chilling as the crimes themselves. London waited for the next scream in the night, the next mutilated body in the shadows, but none came. The Ripper had disappeared into the fog as suddenly as he arrived, leaving only fear, unanswered questions, and an endless trail of speculation. And so, with the blood of Mary Jane Kelly, the canonical Ripper murders came to a close. But the story was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Because soon the world would be consumed by one question. Who was Jack the Ripper? With the murders ended, London was left with terror and questions that refused to fade. Who was Jack the Ripper? How could a killer this bold vanish so completely? Over the decades, hundreds of names have surfaced, but none ever confirmed. One of the earliest suspects was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher, whose death by suicide in December 1888 seemed suspiciously timed with the Ripper's disappearance. Some investigators believed he fit the profile: educated, troubled, and capable of the anatomical precision seen in the killings. But evidence tying him to the crimes was thin, and his involvement remains debated. Another popular suspect was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber living in Whitechapel. He suffered from severe mental illness, and police at the time described him as a violent recluse with a hatred of women. Decades later, DNA testing on a shawl allegedly linked to Catherine Eddowes pointed toward Kosminski, but the evidence has been widely disputed. Was it genuine science, or a desperate attempt to close the case? Then there was Walter Sickert, a famous painter whose disturbing works and rumored obsession with the murders led some to speculate that his art concealed hidden confessions. Crime novelist Patricia Cornwell even argued he was the Ripper, purchasing his paintings to search for forensic clues. Yet historians argue there's no direct proof, and the list goes on. Butchers, doctors, aristocrats, even a member of the royal family, Prince Albert Victor, was dragged into the web of conspiracy theories. The lack of solid evidence allowed speculation to thrive, and every new theory only deepened the enigma. But perhaps the most haunting possibility is that Jack the Ripper was no one extraordinary at all. Not a royal, not a celebrated painter, not a mysterious foreigner, but simply a man who blended into the fog, another face in the crowd, forgotten once his knife fell silent. What makes Jack the Ripper unique is not just the brutality of his crimes, but the fact that he was never caught. His murders became a mirror reflecting society's fears: poverty, immigration, gender violence, and the failings of the police. In many ways, Jack wasn't just a killer. He was a symbol of a city at war with itself. More than a century later, his shadow still lingers. Documentaries, books, films, all revisit those gaslit streets, chasing an answer that never comes. And maybe that's the true power of Jack the Ripper, the mystery itself. Because sometimes The most terrifying monsters are the ones we never unmask. Enjoying this chilling journey into London's darkest mystery? Tap that subscribe button to uncover more unsolved crimes and forgotten history. If you found this story intriguing, give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think Jack the Ripper really was?